The hallway of Mercy Grace Hospital was very quiet that afternoon. At the far end of the corridor, Nurse Ashley Wilson, a woman with a stern look and a cold demeanor, sat at the front desk. She tapped her pen on the clipboard, waiting for the next patient to come. Moments later, the automatic doors slid open, and an elderly woman slowly shuffled in. She was hunched over, supporting her walk with a walking stick, and she was wearing a simple floral dress that seemed out of place in the sterile hospital environment. Her graying hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her tired eyes looked around the room, searching for assistance. Ashley glanced up and saw the woman. She stood reluctantly, her white sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she approached. "Name?" Ashley asked the woman with a cold voice, devoid of any warmth or friendliness. The elderly woman hesitated, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her walking stick. "My name is Mrs. Beverly White. I have an appointment with Dr. Miller," she said softly. Ashley frowned, clearly unimpressed by the old woman's presence. Her eye scanned the appointment list, and after a moment, she nodded without looking up. "Take a seat over there. You'll be called when he's ready." Beverly smiled weakly and made her way to the chair. But as she sat down, she could feel the weight of Ashley's disdainful stare. It wasn't the first time Beverly had encountered someone who treated her differently because of her age or the color of her skin. Over the years, she had learned to endure these moments quietly, hoping that kindness would eventually win over prejudice. But in that moment, something about Ashley's coldness felt personal, almost intentional. Ashley returned to her desk, muttering something under her breath. To her, Beverly was just another patient, one of many she'd have to deal with today. But something about the old woman annoyed her. She didn't like the way Beverly seemed so calm, so poised despite her frail appearance. In her mind, people like Beverly didn't belong in places like this, didn't deserve special care or attention. As the minutes passed, more patients entered the hospital. Ashley greeted them all with the same distant tone, but there was a noticeable difference in how she treated Beverly. While other patients were given clear directions and polite conversation, Beverly was met with curt answers and dismissive gestures. At one point, Beverly tried to ask Ashley for help. "Excuse me," she began, her voice gentle. "Could you tell me how much longer it will be?" Ashley didn't even look up from her desk. "You'll be called when it's time," she snapped. "You can wait like everyone else." Beverly's face fell, but she nodded quietly and returned to her seat. She didn't want to cause a scene. She had learned long ago that it was better to remain quiet and avoid drawing attention to herself. But little did Ashley know, Beverly was far from the ordinary elderly woman she appeared to be. As the hours ticked by, Ashley's impatience grew. She shot glances at Beverly, as if silently wishing she would just leave. But Beverly stayed, patiently waiting, her hands folded in her lap. Eventually, another nurse, a younger woman named Grace, came by to check on the patients. Grace was new to the hospital, still fresh-faced and eager to help. She immediately noticed the tension in the air when she saw Ashley glaring at Beverly. "Hi," Grace said with a smile, approaching Beverly. "Can I get you anything? Water? Are you comfortable?" Beverly smiled, grateful for the kindness. "Oh, I'm fine, thank you," she replied. Grace nodded, but something about the scene felt off to her. She glanced at Ashley, who was tapping her pen against the desk, clearly irritated. Grace had worked alongside Ashley for a few weeks now, and while she had noticed her coworkers' rigid attitude, this felt different. It wasn't just about the hospital's busy schedule. Ashley seemed to have something against Beverly personally, and Grace couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it gave her. "Don't worry," Grace said softly to Beverly, giving her a reassuring smile. "You'll be seen soon." Beverly nodded again, her kind eyes filled with gratitude. As Grace walked away, she couldn't help but wonder why Ashley was acting the way she was. But for now, she kept her thoughts to herself. There would be time to ask questions later. Ashley, meanwhile, sat at her desk, unaware of the storm that was quietly brewing. She thought she had everything under control, that her behavior toward Beverly would go unnoticed. But soon, she would realize that the elderly woman sitting in the waiting room was not just another patient. Beverly White's true identity would soon come to light, and when it did, Ashley's world would be turned upside down. The quiet atmosphere in Mercy Grace Hospital was quickly dissolving into murmurs as patients began to notice the subtle tension between Nurse Ashley and Mrs. Beverly White. Grace, the young nurse, kept glancing at the elderly woman from time to time, her curiosity piqued. Something wasn't right, and the way Ashley treated Beverly was becoming more obvious to others in the waiting room. Beverly sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, still waiting for her turn to see Dr. Miller. Her calm demeanor never wavered, but inside, she was starting to feel the weight of the disrespect being thrown her way. It wasn't just about waiting for hours without being seen, it was the way Ashley made her feel invisible, as if she didn't matter. Beverly had been in this world long enough to know when someone's heart harbored prejudice. Ashley, on the other hand, continued to work with an air of superiority, ignoring the whispers that were slowly creeping through the room. A few patients began to exchange glances, noticing the way Ashley seemed to brush off Beverly's presence. It wasn't just rude, it was unsettling. Grace, still troubled by what she had witnessed, decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. During her break, she approached one of her colleagues, a senior nurse named Janet, who had been working at the hospital for over 20 years. Janet was the type of person everyone respected, and Grace knew that if something was wrong, Janet would know how to handle it. "Janet," Grace began quietly, pulling her aside in the staff break room. "Can I ask you something? Have you noticed how Ashley is treating that elderly woman, Mrs. White?" Janet looked up from her cup of coffee, her forehead wrinkling in concern. "What do you mean?" Grace hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. "It's just... I've seen Ashley be strict with patients before, but this feels different. She's been really cold to Mrs. White, almost like she's going out of her way to ignore her. It just doesn't feel right." Janet's expression grew more serious as she listened. She had worked with Ashley long enough to know that the woman could be difficult, but this was the first time someone had raised a concern like this. "I'll keep an eye on it," Janet said, her voice low. "If something's going on, we need to make sure it's addressed." Meanwhile, in the waiting room, Ashley was growing more irritated. She could feel the eyes of the other patients on her, but she didn't care. In her mind, Beverly White was just another person she could easily dismiss. There was something about the woman's quiet dignity that got under Ashley's skin. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, or perhaps it was something deeper, something that Ashley didn't want to admit even to herself. Then, the hospital doors opened again, and a tall man in a dark suit walked in. His presence was commanding, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to fall silent. His gaze scanned the room, eventually landing on Beverly. "Mom," he called out, his voice filled with warmth as he rushed over to where she sat today. Beverly's face lit up when she saw him. "Isaac," she exclaimed softly, struggling to rise from her chair. The man, Isaac White, bent down to embrace his mother gently. His deep voice carried a tone of respect and affection as he spoke to her. "I came as soon as I could. Sorry it took me a while to get here." Ashley, watching the interaction from her desk, felt her stomach tighten. She had heard that name before, Isaac White. As the pieces slowly fell into place, her heart sank. Isaac wasn't just any man, he was the mayor of this city. Isaac helped his mother back into her seat before turning toward Ashley, his eyes hardening. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharp. "Why has my mother been sitting here for hours without seeing a doctor? Is this how you treat elderly patients at Mercy Grace Hospital?" Ashley stammered, suddenly flustered. I didn't realize." Isaac's gaze pierced through her, and the tension in the room thickened. Everyone else in the waiting area was watching now, their curiosity turning into silent outrage. The whispers grew louder as people began to connect the dots. Grace, standing at the edge of the room, felt a surge of relief mixed with concern. She had no idea that Beverly was the mayor's mother, but now it was clear that Ashley's behavior had crossed the line. And not just any line, it had crossed into dangerous territory. Isaac straightened, his tall frame casting a shadow over Ashley's desk. "I expect my mother to be treated with respect, like any other patient here. If this is how your hospital operates, then I have serious concerns." Ashley's face turned pale, her usual smugness gone. She was at a loss for words, knowing that she had made a critical mistake. The room was heavy with anticipation, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Beverly, always the gentle soul, touched her son's arm. "Isaac, please," she said softly. "Let's not make a scene. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." But Isaac wasn't ready to let it go. He turned to look at the other patients, who had been watching quietly. "Has anyone else noticed how my mother was treated today?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Several patients nodded, their eyes shifting toward Ashley. "Yeah," one man finally spoke up with a firm voice. "We all saw it." Ashley's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of her actions. She had disrespected not only an elderly woman, but the mother of the most influential man in the state. And now, she was about to face the consequences. The waiting room, once quiet and unassuming, now buzzed with quiet whispers and the shifting of uncomfortable glances. The revelation that Beverly White was the mother of Isaac White, the mayor, had electrified the air. Ashley stood frozen behind her desk, her palms growing sweaty as she glanced around nervously. She had crossed the line, and she knew it. Isaac remained at his mother's side. His face was calm, but there was a cold fire in his eyes, a quiet fury that anyone with sense would have feared. Ashley, once filled with an arrogant sense of control, felt small. She opened her mouth to speak, trying to salvage the situation. "I didn't know who she was, Mr. White. I mean, if I had known." Isaac's gaze cut her off. "It shouldn't matter who she is. You shouldn't treat any patient like this. My mother is no different than anyone else here." The room was still as his words hung in the air. Ashley's excuses died on her lips. He was right. No matter who Beverly was, Ashley had shown her nothing but disrespect, and not just her, but likely countless other patients who had passed through the hospital doors. But now, her actions had come back to haunt her in a way she never imagined. Grace, standing quietly near the back of the room, felt a sense of justice beginning to unfold. She had felt in her heart that Ashley's treatment of Beverly was wrong, but now it was clear that Ashley's behavior had gone beyond just rudeness. This was something deeper, something uglier. "Is there a manager I can speak to?" Isaac asked. Ashley quickly nodded, but with a pale face. "I'll call her right away," she said, rushing to pick up the phone. Her fingers fumbled over the buttons as she dialed, the weight of her action sinking in with every passing second. This wasn't just a mistake anymore, this was a nightmare. While they waited, Isaac sat beside his mother, taking her hand gently. He turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Beverly smiled at her son, a smile full of warmth and love. "I'm fine, Isaac. Don't worry about me." She looked around the room, her eyes still kind despite everything she had been through that day. "I've seen worse." Isaac nodded. He couldn't stand the thought of his mother or anyone else being treated with such disregard. He knew that as mayor, it was his duty to fight for justice, whether the victim was a family member or a stranger. Just then, the door to the waiting room opened, and a woman in a navy blue suit walked in. Her name tag read Linda Powers, and she was the hospital's administrator. Her presence immediately commanded attention. She walked straight to Ashley's desk. "Mr. White," she greeted Isaac, acknowledging his status. "I understand there's been an issue here." Isaac stood with a stern but respectful look. "Yes, Ms. Powers. There's a serious issue with how patients are being treated at this hospital, particularly my mother. She's been sitting here for hours, disrespected and ignored. I need to know if this is how your staff treats all of your patients." Linda's expression tightened as she glanced toward Ashley, who was now looking at the floor, avoiding everyone's eyes. "I sincerely apologize for what's happened," Linda began to plead. "This is not the kind of care we expect from our staff. I'll be conducting a thorough investigation into this matter." Isaac wasn't done. He could see that Linda was taking the situation seriously, but he wanted more than just apologies. He wanted accountability. "This isn't just about my mother," he said. "It's about making sure no one else has to go through what she did. I expect to see changes in how things are run here." Linda nodded, her expression unwavering. "You're absolutely right. I'll make sure that we address this immediately." Ashley's heart sank as she realized the gravity of the situation. Her career, the reputation she had worked so hard to build, was now hanging by a thread. She could feel the stares of the other patients boring into her back, the weight of their silent judgment suffocating. But just when it seemed like everything had spiraled out of control, Beverly spoke up. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the room with surprising strength. "I appreciate your concern, Isaac," she said, looking at her son, then at Linda. "But I don't want anyone to lose their job over this. I believe in second chances. We all make mistakes." Everyone in the room turned to look at her, surprised by her grace. Even Ashley, who had been prepared for the worst, looked up in disbelief. However, Beverly continued, her voice growing firmer, "I do want to see real change here. Not just for me, but for everyone who comes through these doors. People deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are." Isaac looked at his mother with admiration and pride. She had always been the kind of woman who believed in forgiveness, who saw the good in people even when it wasn't easy. He nodded, respecting her wishes. Linda, too, seemed taken aback by Beverly's words. She cleared her throat and said, "Mrs. White, I can't express how much I appreciate your understanding. We'll ensure that changes are made, and you have my word that what happened today will not happen again." Beverly smiled gently. "Thank you. I'll be watching. Ashley stood behind her desk, her face flushed with both shame and relief. She knew she had been given a lifeline, a chance to do better. But that didn't erase the damage she had done. As she watched Isaac help his mother to her feet, she vowed to herself that things would change, not just because she had to, but because she had learned something important that day. Thank you very much for watching till the end of this story. If you enjoyed watching, subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more thrilling stories. Don't hesitate to also like the video and share it with your loved ones too. Enjoy your day.